Visit faithfullygrowing.com to connect with the Faithfully Growing community, where you can access resources to deepen your parts work journey and join a supportive network of like-minded individuals. For just $9 a month, you'll get access to weekly drop-in Zoom sessions, a growing library of resources, and a weekly email with journaling prompts to support your IFS work. Be sure to sign up for my free guided meditations while you're there. These meditations are thoughtfully crafted to help you connect with your inner parts, cultivate self-compassion, and find moments of peace in your day. This podcast is more than meditations and insights. It's a space for connection, healing, and support. Whether you're here for your own journey or helping others on theirs, you make this community and its impact possible. Welcome back to IFS Meditations and Insights. I'm Tim Fortescue, your guide on this journey towards spiritual wholeness and healing through an internal family systems lens. You can reach me at tim@faithfullygrowing.com. Together, we're creating space to explore, accept, and love all parts of ourselves. By doing so, we experience divine connection and live more fully. Let's begin. I'm excited and honored to have David Polidi on the podcast today for a conversation. David is a licensed social worker from Massachusetts who is IFS Level 2 trained and an EMDR consultant in training. He has a private practice called Empowered Through Compassion and also a podcast of the same name. He enjoys working with individual clients and couples. He also is a consultant for therapists who have been trained in EMDR and looking for support to integrate EMDR into their work and become EMDR certified. When he's not working, David loves to be with his family, his wife, daughter, and golden retriever. He enjoys hiking, running, and getting to know a wide variety of people through compassionate conversations. And I can vouch for David in that. And so let's dive into this compassionate conversation now with David Polidi. Well, David, so glad that we get to spend some time together. Just grateful that you were willing to come on the podcast. And listeners are new to this. I've only done this one other time, but plan to do it more regularly. But grateful that you're here and would love just to hear just some more introduction, who you are, whatever you want to share, just in general. And then I look forward to talking more about EMDR and IFS, how you're using that together. And really looking forward to this conversation. So welcome.
I'm psyched. I think this is great that you're doing this and the interviewing, and that I'm the second one. That feels just like such an honor, and I love your show. A little bit about me. My name is David. I'm a therapist, trained as a social worker. So I'm licensed in that, and I just noticed that a lot of my clients who I was working with um, all have things that they're trying to work out in their life. There's always been these threads that go back to some traumatic stuff that have happened earlier in their histories, and so getting interested in kind of exploring how do we help people heal from these traumas. I got interested in EMDR, and then in my EMDR class they actually mentioned IFS. Then I got interested in IFS, and so now I'm interested in the combination of the two, and how I really feel that they bring out the best in one another. And so it's been a really exciting journey to to figure out some of the secrets on how to heal people.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm curious too, like, what is trauma? If to someone that's just maybe thinking that, or we hear that word a lot, and you hear little t, big T, whatnot. I don't know if you could elaborate on that a little more.
Absolutely. Well, I'll nerd out a little bit. So I think I kind of refer back, and I'm sure there's other people that could refer back to other places, but I refer back to Judith Herman's work, and her pivotal book, on trauma. And, uh, and so, yeah, my understanding has kind of grown to mean a whole bunch of things, when it comes to trauma. I think in the DSM-5, which is the book that a lot of us use in the field to diagnose, a client and then get reimbursement, they have their own distinctive criteria for trauma and how to meet, PTSD, which is one of the diagnoses that you'd actually get for having, big trauma in your life. And I would call that like a big T trauma. When somebody has a trauma that is overwhelming to the extent that, they see death, they are in war and they see people dying around them, or they've been in this horrific car accident and, the people next to them have died, and or their life, they were close to death. That's a big T trauma. But then you talk about these little T traumas, and kind of how I'm envisioning it is in a way where I'll go to Buddhism. In Buddhism, they say we all suffer. And in a way, there's like a connection there between we all suffer, and my own thinking, we all have trauma. We all have things that at times in our life have felt, discomforting. Perhaps you could use the word discomforting, upsetting. I think what makes it traumatic is that if any event, and it could be anything because trauma is really not the event itself, but how we're responding to it. If anything in our life has made us feel that my life is threatened, or I'm going into a situation where, even being disconnected from somebody else is feeling overwhelmingly threatened to me, that something very awful could happen, even death could happen from feeling so disconnected. And that overwhelmingness makes it so that in that moment, my normal reaction to fight, to flee, to freeze. I'm trying to do something, but I'm not feeling in control of the situation. I'm not feeling that I can necessarily make myself safe in that moment. My body is going to be reacting in a certain way. And one of the things that our body does, that has allowed our species to, um, continue and to survive, is to hold on to that emotional memory. There's something about that moment where the body's like, I'm not going to forget this, because if this happens again, I need to be aware of it. So holding on to whatever it is that's going on in our body, so that in some future date, if there's something that feels familiar or reminds us of that, our body's going to be put into like almost a time machine and fly back to that moment when that happened and react as if that initial, um, difficulty that we were struggling with is happening in this moment presently. That to me would be trauma and a trauma reaction.
And that may be a good segue into EMDR. And I'm not trained. I'm married to a therapist who is trained in EMDR. And I mean, I know there's a lot about tapping. And and I think this is different, but in my own therapy, I've been in where you kind of watch the stick, but that is that brain spotting, or like you watch the tip of the stick, and is that totally different? And then, yeah, go ahead.
Could be EMDR as well. EMDR, one of the tenets of EMDR is this bilateral stimulation. So with a stick, I mean, I don't know a lot about brain spotting, but I think you could do brain spotting with a stick. But I know with EMDR, however you have like this attention on one side of your body, then the other, then the one side of the body, then the other, that's bilateral stimulation. So I could potentially have a stick and say, Tim, I want you to watch this stick, and I'm going to move it from the left part of the screen to the right side, back and forth and back and forth. And so that could be a way that the stick could be used for EMDR.
Okay. And that's helpful. And I think when I did it, it was a rapid back and forth. So it could likely be the bilateral approach there. And I know it led me into saying maybe it's a good segue because I know I've heard people talk about with EMDR, you do go back to a triggering experience or what. Tell me more about that. How does EMDR work?
Sure. Well, what I love about EMDR, yeah, a bunch of stuff. It's what's called a phase model of trauma healing. So Judith Herman again, she came up. I think she came up. I don't know if there was stuff before her, but she definitely proposed this three phases of trauma healing, and so I think that's been utilized a lot within the trauma world. And EMDR has its own phases, and EMDR actually has 8 phases of trauma healing. And so we part of what EMDR does, which I believe IFS does as well, so they both do it in their own way, is it's a map of what does this uh, process of trying to heal our trauma actually look like. And so this lays out a map of 8 phases. And I will say that both IFS and EMDR have a lot in common. And this is perhaps one of them, that EMDR, before we even go into um, the phases, there's some assumptions within the model. And so one of the big assumptions is that we all have this amazing body that we're born into, and that when we have trauma, our bodies are really focused on how do we survival. And so it's not like something's wrong with us when we have trauma. It's just that our bodies are kind of getting stuck in the survival response. And so part of the beautiful, insight of EMDR is that our bodies always also hold the healing within it as well. So if I'm your therapist and we're going to be doing EMDR, I'm not going to be bringing something to the table to heal you. I'm going to be on a journey with you to explore how your body already holds the keys to healing, and we're going to tap into that healing essence that you have within your body to allow whatever needs to happen to release the trauma. Either they call it with EMDR the memories, the emotional learning, the memories, what we're going to do, how you could tap into your own system to be able to release the trauma memories that you no longer need.
Right. And I've heard people too talk about, I mean, people will say, a trauma happens and they've even reached out to my wife. Can we do an EMDR session? How does it work? Like, so in one sense, it seems like it can be very acute, kind of even a one session thing versus multiple. Can you speak more to that or how that works?
Sure. And yeah, there's a whole bunch here with EMDR. I think that kind of going to the phases again as well. Um, it was initially, I believe, created by Francine Shapiro, and I don't know if we said this. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so it was. Um, I'll tell you the story if you want that everybody knows, and
Please.
this is
And
we
you
can
you
all learn
take
from
this
it.
where it needs to go. You take this where it needs to go too. So
Okay.
give us, did you say it was a lunch or yeah, give us whatever you want to give us.
Okay, sure. And yeah, and definitely your feedback through it is very helpful. So once upon a time, back in 1987, there was this woman who was in school going, I believe, for a doctoral degree, had some disturbing thoughts in her head. And she tried to think them through and recognize that, like, okay, I'm processing something inside. And this woman who was walking through the park was named Francine Shapiro, and she recognized that as she was processing these memories, her eyes were moving back and forth kind of rapidly. And that was kind of the seed that then began her search to create this model, which became, she used, all the information that was already in the field on trauma, and interwove it and then created her model. There was a lot, I believe, that was popular in that time that said, the golden standard for treating trauma is exposure therapy. And so she was using that insight and she was trying to desensitize by imagining what had happened. But when mixing it with the eye movement, she realized that it not only desensitized somebody, but they were also able to reprocess the memories. And their unconscious was able to allow these memories to almost, reconstruct themselves into new and helpful and healing ways. And so she also came up with, in addition to EMDR, part of that model is there's an AIP model, which is adaptive information processing. And what that is, and for you, all of you who are familiar with self and self energy, AIP is very similar to self energy, and that this is the network within us which allows healing to take place. That allows, any of these memories, once we're able to have them kind of enter into this highway, what the body's going to do is it's going to hold on to whatever information has will be productive for our growth and healing and maturity. It's going to hold on to that, and everything else is just going to be released from our body. And she likens it to almost like digestion. You're going to eat something, and you're going to take out the nutrients, and then you're going to excrete what you don't need anymore. Now, with trauma, it's like you take a piece of food and it gets lodged inside of you and it never leaves and it's just inside. Somehow it's gotten off track and it's not in that same neural network of healing. And so we're trying to go with the eye movement, trying to reactivate this trauma memory to gently place it back on this highway. So then we could take out what we need and then get rid of what we don't need anymore. So going back to your question, this was initially created for pretty much people that she was picking, cherry picking, that had a single incident trauma. So they had something really, a big T trauma, something that was very substantial, and they couldn't get it out of their brain. And so she would go do this, and they would be healed. What we're finding now is a lot more people, more than like a single incident trauma, they have what's called complex trauma. And when you have complex trauma, it's more like you have one traumatic thing that happened in your life, and then you had another, and you had another, and you had another. So it's like a series of just traumatic things that have happened that have really blossomed out into a complex kind of network. And so there's different ways to, I think, work with those complex traumas that people have brought to the model to help it be more effective with that complex trauma. But again, going back to the 8 phases, I think it's really important to do at least the first and the second one before doing the third and the fourth one. And phases. And what I mean by that is the first phase is just getting to know somebody, getting to understand their system, getting to connect with them. And the second one as well, the second phase is really kind of finding how could this person tap into safety within their own bodies? How could they relax their bodies to be able to feel, very present focused and very safe in this moment so that with that safety, then you could start moving into, all right, how are we going to desensitize and reprocess some of these traumatic memories. I think one of the maybe faults that we need to be careful not to do is to move too quickly into, I want to reprocess these trauma memories, because then there's a risk of um, re-traumatizing the person. That the real beauty of EMDR is this dual awareness, where I'm going to build up whatever resources I have internally or around me in my life, so that I'm really standing on this safe place here. And so some of the work, maybe all the work is that, but at least you need to start with that safe place. And then if you want to do trauma processing, what you do is you have one foot firmly standing in safety, one toe dipping into the traumatic, activating the traumatic memory network, and then kind of going back and forth and allowing that traumatic memory to be surrounded by this feeling of safety, and seeing if we could get their movement to happen so that there could be reprocessing.
Yeah. And I think in leading into IFS, and I'd love to hear more of your journey and just your passion of knowing both of them and kind of the strengths and maybe some of the not so much strengths that go together with them. And so I want to hear about that. But when you had talked about just developing that safety, I know I've had clients before who've come in, and IFS is all I do, but they had done EMDR before, and it can you bypass protectors in that? So, I mean, not that it's good, but in this instance, I've had clients where the EMDR session or a couple sessions, it really stirred things up and those protectors were up. And it seemed like to me they may have been bypassed a little bit, but maybe start there and then, yeah, we can hear more about IFS and EMDR.
Sure, sure. That's a great point. I think that EMDR and IFS, I'm going to be really honest here. I'm very authentic. They're both tools, right? They're both tools that we're using. And um, to some extent, they're only as good as the person who's wielding the tool. And so with EMDR, one of the critiques that I feel people have rightly brought to the table is that exactly what you're saying, that sometimes we're taught to very quickly ask a person, what are the 10 most traumatic things that have happened in your life? And we're taught to not dwell on it and not really allow the person to experience them or feel them, but just to tell us, what are the 10 worst things. And then even I've heard horror stories of people meeting with a client and then saying, go home and think of the 10 worst things that have ever happened to you, and then come back and we're going to work on those little by little. That's incredibly triggering to some people and some systems. And this is where I don't know exactly Francine's intent. And if she specified that or not, I think the original text that she has is beautiful and intricate, and is very worth reading. So I won't, guess if she meant that or not. But for me, I feel there absolutely has to be um, a real respect for when is the right time to kind of open some of those doors to start working on trauma. And so that's one of the beauties of combining the two models, is that we absolutely want to check with the person's system. And before going to an exile, we want to see, like, who are the protectors that are present, and we don't want to just railroad over the protectors. So I think, EMDR is this amazing tool of how do we understand the trauma and the trauma healing. IFS brings to the table. Um, I don't think IFS says don't do that. I think IFS says more, okay, but let's just slow down. Let's take a breath. Let's slow the process down. And let's really make sure we're respecting all of the parts within a person's system, so that if we are going to go towards this trauma, we do have the permission of everybody. So I think that definitely the best of EMDR, the best of IFS in this instance works really well together, because they could help ultimately doing that is going to help EMDR be more effective. And so I think this is one of those times where, for me, the map that IFS allows us to have is almost vital to really be able to see within a person, where are their parts, what are their parts, and do we have permission? If I'm going to do EMDR on you, and this is, I think part of EMDR, if I'm going to do EMDR on you, I want to make sure that I'm explaining it to you and that you give me a big yes. Are you ready? Yes. And if you and I agree, I think you're ready, you think you're ready, let's go and do it. Let's give you some relief. Let's find some healing. IFS says, well, wait a minute. You said yes, but let's ask, what part of you said yes? Was it all the parts? Was it just one part that had like this real urgency to deal with the trauma and get rid of it? Like, let's make sure we're listening to all the parts. We have all of the consent, and now we move forward.
Yeah, that's great. And I love the reminder. It's just a tool. And even though IFS, it's all I've known, it's all I've done. Yeah, I've heard those stories. And some people do like, just, let's get to the exile, let's get to the healing. But yeah, first of all, it depends on who is delivering that tool. And yeah, that backlash is real for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And some therapists, I like to think all of us have the best intentions when we go, when we use this stuff, when we do this stuff. I think sometimes we're listening to a client that's saying, I really want to do this. I can't wait. I'm excited. And that's where we as a therapist need to be aware of, like, what are our parts that are getting activated, really being in self, and sometimes slowing the client down for their own good.
Yes, because they want, in my case, to get to that exile. Let's get to healing. But those
That's right.
protectors are, and it comes back for sure. Yeah, it's great. Well, tell us more.
I've been
Yeah,
doing a
yeah.
lot
Go
of
ahead,
work.
David.
Well, this is just one of the things that I've been kind of fascinated with and trying to talk to people about this. I've been really interested in this concept of resourcing because within IFS and EMDR, I think there's a lot of convergence. And I feel like one thing that maybe they're almost polarized on, there's a big disagreement on, is this thing of resourcing and EMDR thing. We have to have resourcing. And particularly if somebody is dissociating, particularly if somebody is really struggling with this huge trauma, the resourcing is vital to have this um, dual awareness. Whereas IFS says we don't believe in resourcing. Resourcing is bad. Bad. You say the word resourcing, it's like a punch in the gut. And resourcing means that we're just trying to calm all of the protectors down. And then in I think IFS mindset, it's like we're therefore not listening to the protectors. If you have a real angry protector and you say, like, okay, we're gonna breathe, we're gonna relax, then the anger one is like, but you're not listening to why I'm angry. And so to them, it's very counterintuitive, where the whole model is about listening to the anger, to all of these feelings, emotions, energies that are in us. And if we're consciously trying to resource them, to relax them, or whatever we're trying to do, it feels like we're not being, uh, not allowing us to have the space to really hold what these parts of us are trying to tell us.
Yeah. When it sounds like too, yeah, you're just bringing the self energy too, or helping facilitate. I mean, it boils down to semantics sometimes too. Yeah. I mean, I like what you're saying there.
That's exactly what I feel. That's exactly. And I don't know if sometimes that upsets people who are kind of, really feel very strongly about a particular way. I do feel it's semantics. I think it's beautifully said. I think the semantics of it is, and this is where I use the word bypassing, right? Like, we use it in IFS to say, if we're spiritually bypassing, we're using spirituality to be in this good, loving, light place, but we're using it to separate us or even sometimes to feel superior to other people. Whereas with the resourcing, I think if we're using it just to calm down and not really listening, we're resource bypassing, as
Yeah. Yeah.
opposed to if we're using a resource to be able to calm our system so we could really open up space, really connect with these parts of us and what they're saying. Why not do resourcing? It's all how we're going to use that.
It's great. It's great. Well, just tell. Well, I like to ask people. Well, I've had one other person, so you're the second person, but I'm getting in the habit of asking people just like, how do you explain IFS to someone initially?
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a question I would ask somebody like yourself. How would I explain IFS? I would say, I mean, sometimes you don't need to, right?
Right.
Sometimes you don't need to.
I'm fine. I get, yeah, less is more.
Just
Yeah.
less is definitely more. And um, I have a tendency to like not want to go into a session and say all these things that I know and make myself look really crazy. But then at the same time, I have this humor where I'm like, I'll make myself crazy. We all have parts. We have multiplicity, and there's parts talking within us. It kind of depends on the person that you're sitting with and where they're at in their own journey. Um, I think that if we were talking about somebody that never heard of IFS before, and they sought me out, and we're talking about trauma, I think the way that you're doing it, like talking about the different models and talking about um, what is trauma, that could be helpful at times. Um, yeah, I think less is definitely more, and I think what I like to do is I think our biggest tool when it comes to counseling is really being able to listen, and that's such a nuanced skill. Really listening with your heart, with your body, with everything is so important. And I'm thinking this is the silly thing where I learned for motivational interviewing that the Chinese character for listening has a whole bunch of pieces to it. And so it has this part of the character which has ears, but then it has another part which has heart, and I believe another part which you could translate as uh, patience, or I don't know all of them. I have to see the character again, but it's a lot more than just your ears. There's a way of like full listening and attention. And so I think with both of these models, you just sit, you listen to where your client is, what they're communicating to you, and then when you notice the opportune moments, you're able to pick out like, I wonder if a part of you is has just kind of shared blah blah blah. And then you could say, and maybe there's another part of you that feels very different. And could you feel those two different parts in you right now coming out? And so really allowing the client to feel the model as opposed to just in their head talking about it.
Yeah. And often, yeah, those parts, it's asking that, like, who else is there or who is responding? There's often more. Or, I've had people talk about, we're talking about IFS, for example, in a consultation, and wow, it's really clicking. And then they'll share another story about, oh, but I'm anxious about this. And I'll say, it sounds like those protectors are really up there. And they're like, oh, yeah. So they're talking about it. And then it's happening. And it's usually just underneath the surface there of that work, too, I'm finding.
Yes,
And, yeah.
definitely.
Well, tell us more about, yeah, IFS, your journey, kind of how you see, just kind of what else. Just want to open up just a little more space for you to go at it if there's anything that's there. And I will pose one other thing that's coming to. Well, I'm thinking about, like, I have heard some people, I don't agree with this, but you talk about the protectors, and there's, managers, firefighters, but some people will say there are also dissociative protectors, which I don't think we need another category, but those numbing parts and the trauma and the stuff we're talking about with EMDR, like, how have you seen that in your work? And can you give me any insight as a practitioner? Knowing, IFS is a trauma informed model. And what insight have you had when molding the two when that numbing comes up, and how EMDR and IFS may work together? Are there any principles there?
Yeah, that's a really interesting, wonderful question. I think that EMDR has taught me that just to be very mindful and aware of dissociated parts, because if you're processing trauma and somebody is dissociating, that could go wrong very quickly and very deeply. So you really want to be aware, have experience, have a consultant, have somebody that you could look to for support if you're dealing with dissociation, just so that you have a good handle on it. I think EMDR has said that, and they do really communicate that quite a bit, especially in the initial class, the initial training. And so there's more advanced trainings within EMDR to deal with dissociation. And we call it fragmentation. We could call it, parts coming out. I think I also understand that dissociation, it feels to me like there's a spectrum of dissociation. So, how dissociated is somebody is an important question to explore with them and to see, like, are we talking about somebody who's full on DID, um, dissociative identity disorder, in which case there's real amnesia between going from parts to parts, or um, and that would be, you know, an understanding of the idea. I think would be important to work with people who have the ID. Or are we talking about just, this normal kind of life experience that we have where we do have parts, and sometimes when we're blended with a part, or we're in an activity that's really exciting to us, there's like almost this real typical kind of losing of time, or losing of ourselves within the activity. So I think there's really an importance to understand, like, what dissociation are we talking about? And then IFS would say, I think, just let's understand, this dissociated part or parts, let's really try to ask them, like, why are you here? And what is going on? And to have a sense through communication with them, um, what it is that they're afraid of, and how to really respect what it is that they're needing. So we're not just pushing through without really holding space for, understanding them a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. That's helpful. And yeah, I'm probably looking to you for too much, because sometimes these dissociated parts in myself, and then others, like, well, I have a lot of parts that really want to figure it out so we can get somewhere. And that's where we need to start. We've got, and for those that are listening, yes, often, and the reminder that sometimes people just really, we all want the healing. We want to get there, but I've heard it over and over again, and moving slower. And that can trigger those protectors that are polarized with those that aren't quite there yet. That's where the work is, and we can't push it. And so that's a good reminder for me.
Absolutely. And it slows down quite a bit in IFS because, like, let's say somebody has a dissociated part and it's causing them pain and they do not like it. And it's like, come on, help me heal. I don't want to be dissociated. The first thing I'm going to ask, or one of the first things I probably would ask, would be, how do you feel towards this dissociated part? Oh, I hate it. It's awful. Get rid of it. All right. So now what we have to do is turn away from that dissociated part and say, well, you're in a part, even when you're saying that. That's really a part saying, I don't like it. I want to get rid of it. And so we ask, could that part step back so that we could work with the dissociated part. Now, if that part doesn't want to step back or is having trouble to, or is so blended, then now that's the loudest part in the room. And that's the part. So before we even are able to work with the trauma, we have to first work with the dissociated part that doesn't want to deal with the trauma. And then before we deal with the dissociated part, we have to deal with the parts that don't like it, that are actively trying to get rid of it.
Yeah. And then when we get to the point, does anyone have any fears or concerns of us going to this little 3-year-old? And they say, no, we're good. It's all good. Then everything slows down even more. When we're in that exile realm, I've been taught that you have to take it even slower there. And so it's a lot, but things, not that we're trying to push things to move rapidly, but in that slowness, I'll speak for myself and my own work. When that healing comes, it begins to come. I mean, there's still more work, but it's self and it's right and it's good.
So I'm curious what you just said. To ask you a question. How do you mean that you slow down even more when you get to the exile?
Yeah, well, I have just been taught in my training, and I've found, I mean, a lot of it is getting these protectors to soften back, but just in the protocol, I found when you get to that exile realm, and then often when you're there, for me, those protectors, it's kind of back and forth, protective realm, exile realm, because it takes time. But then I have just been taught, and I've seen like those exiles, they have a lot to share. They've been, sometimes I struggle with the label firefighter and manager. I get it. But exiles are exiled. Like there's no way, they've been pushed down for a long time. And when they start, they've got stories. They've got a lot of trust to build too, but they don't have a job. They just want to be seen and heard, witnessed, and often held. And I found that it takes time. And yeah, and it just really have to be with those little ones. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Could I invite you another way to look at this?
Please.
How would that feel? Would that feel okay?
That Phil,
I'll invite you to.
go for it.
Okay, okay. I do love what you're saying, and I don't think you're wrong. I think that we're building a relationship that with these young ones that could last a lifetime and should last a lifetime. You know, once we see them, if we can hold space for them and check in with them, have some kind of practice around that. That is so beautiful and could really, I feel, enrich our lives. It's enriched my life. Um, when I was talking with Andrew Dobo, who I'm gonna publish it soon. Um, he wrote a book and he was talking about EMDR. So we're not talking about IFS, EMDR, but with EMDR, he said when we're doing the healing, it's at the speed of thought. Like, and some people say EMDR is very quick because what you're doing is once you're tapping into the AIP network, we're going into this unconscious realm where it could take a while, it could take very quickly. We don't know, but it's that unconscious just kind of working through, almost as in like as if we're in a dream state, working through whatever connections it needs to make to find that kind of healing, that healing movement within our systems. And so by applying EMDR to IFS, I wonder if, because I've always thought once we get to the exile, I mean, we definitely need to earn trust. We definitely need to form that relationship and hear them out. And then we could say to that exile, would it be okay? How would you feel if we do some uh, EMDR with you right now? You know, and as long as we have an abundance of self energy and we're working with that exile, and they want to do EMDR, we could then add in the bilateral, and sometimes the healing could be extremely quick. Sometimes it can almost be like this instantaneous unburdening. But it's really, we start getting into almost like in the Star Wars, right? We're all of a sudden entering into light speed. So it's like it's not like because with all of this work, the time that it takes to do every single one of these steps is really determined by the client's body. and determined by how the client's body is responding. It's the speed of trust in some ways, and it's the speed of their ability to heal. And a lot of times when you have protectors that are clinging on and really big and don't want to let go, that shows us that probably the size of the protector is corresponds to the size of the exile. And then so but once we're in that realm of the exile, and then we allow it to feel the self energy, which that could be a while to really allow it to feel and to trust and to to be able to just relax itself, to be vulnerable with the self energy and with the client self energy. The healing could be this snap of the fingers magic. And I'll say this too. Um, yes, yes. And one of the things that Bruce Hersey talks about, which he's my mentor and I really respect him. He's with Michelle Richardson. They've created Syzygy Institute, which trains people to integrate IFS and EMDR. Uh, he will say, you know, when you're doing EMDR, you in this model, you always want to ask yourself, what part are you doing EMDR with? You're not just doing EMDR with a memory or with you're doing it with a part. And he has his own protocol for if you're doing it with a protector, okay, this is what we want to look for. If you're doing it with an exile, that's actually a lot more just basic protocol of EMDR. So in this situation, once we get to an exile, you just want to make sure, like, do we have permission from the exile to do the EMDR? And if so, we're kind of doing it with the exile.
What advice would you give to folks that are curious and want to learn more?
Yeah, totally. Thanks. Okay, so for clinicians, we'll start with clinicians. I think, you know, ideally, if you have the money, if you have the time, I think there's really the best thing is to get trained in the models, you know, and maybe finding out more about them. Um, I recommend for clinicians, you know, um, it never hurts to have your own therapy, right? Maybe if you have your own traumas, maybe you want to try out these therapies, see how if it works for you. I know a lot of people, they feel as therapists, if it works for me, like I know that this works because I felt it work. And then they're that much more passionate about bringing it to clients. So I think it's really just immersing yourself in this world, listening to the podcast, listening to, you know, reading the books, and just kind of getting a sense of what is EMDR, what is IFS, and EMDR is probably more accessible. IFS, if you're able to sign up and get chosen for the institute, I mean their trainings are incredible. And there's other ways to get trained. The Syzygy Institute that I spoke about. If you're trained in EMDR, they have a step one where they'll give you the basic concepts of IFS and have some space to practice it. Or Stepping Stones is another place which is great to get some basic IFS training. Um, and then to, you know, I think just dive in and once you have that, once you have the training or you're working with somebody that really um, could help you through these models, seeing little by little if you could bring that to clients and how that feels. I think once you're trained, also, and maybe even if you're not trained, but I think you really should be trained um, in EMDR if you're going to use EMDR, and hopefully you have some kind of training in IFS. Um, the next step would be to get a consultant, to have somebody who you could bring some of the cases to, and that adds another level of confidence. I think when you're using these models, and particularly, you know, if we're working with people and at their most vulnerable, to really feel like we're doing it in a way where um, we're not going to be eroding the protectors, and we're not going to be re-traumatizing. But so I feel consultation could be very helpful. It's all about the relationship. Like the relationship is key. So first and foremost, find somebody that you trust, that you feel there is some kind of back and forth where you just feel comfortable with that person. And we all have people for whatever reason that we have that feeling that yeah, this is somebody I'd like to go on this journey with. So I think that's the first thing. If you're looking specifically for IFS or EMDR, or even IFS and EMDR, there's directories that I think could be really helpful. The IFS Institute has a directory of everybody trained and certified in IFS. EMDRIA, which is EMDR International Association. So it's just EMDRIA. They also have um, a list where if you go onto their website, you could put in what state you're from, and you could see all the people that are certified with EMDRIA for able to do EMDR. So I'd say that's one way to find. And then the Syzygy Institute has people that they've trained in both IFS and EMDR. So you could find a provider. I think, something that I love about the two models is that they feel very experiential for me, where if you've tried talk therapy, you've tried other modes of therapy where you're just not feeling like you're getting real resolution and healing for your trauma, um, that this is both these models are they have I think a lot of practitioners who use them will do a lot of um, internal looking at your body and what's going on inside of you, and so there's feelings, right, and there's real feelings that come up through these models. So I've known for me, when I've been working with an IFS therapist, it just amazes me how deeply it goes and how quickly it gets to these really deep places. And that's been such a just huge life changer. So I think it's kind of, maybe you want to read a book, by Dick Schwartz. He has No Bad Parts. Um, they have a bunch of books, I think, in the IFS world that are very accessible. And there's more and more books coming out with people that have either done, themselves have done EMDR as the client, or there's a book out that has both the client and the therapist, and they wrote a book together. So there's some definite accessible books for that. Um, but I think it's kind of a question of, if you feel like you want to do this deep work, if you're ready for it, if you feel like this is a good time, and if you really want to have something that's more than just going on with you trying to cognitively understand everything that psychologically that's going on inside your life right now, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but it's almost like, imagine going into a therapist office and having me say to you, like, I want to hear your story. I want to create space for all of that. And also, could we take all of those parts in your brain that are really trying to think this through and really trying to understand it, and give them appreciation? And I'm so happy that they're here. They have helped you with your life so much. But can they maybe give us a little bit of space? Could they step back a little bit? And let's try to, like, just see in your body, like, without thinking about it, what are you feeling right now? And what's coming up? And if those things could have some words, what would they be saying, or what would they be wanting to show you? And so we're quickly entering into this realm of active imagination. And if that's something that's enticing or is interesting to you, then I say, check it out. Check out IFS and EMDR. It's this world which is just so interesting. I talk to a lot of people who are on the level that I am, that you are, that we're working with people, we're working with clients on a human to human basis. Not that research is not, but not on the research theoretical level, but on a human level, where I think a lot of us feel like, if something works, let's use it, right? Like, if this is good and it's working and it's helping somebody feel better, I don't care what I'm calling it. I'm going to use that within the therapy session. And I think there's a lot. I mean, I've kind of got very attracted to IFS and EMDR, but I'm also really just really excited about nonviolent communication. I love motivational interviewing. And there's a lot of other models that are out there that also have beauty. And part of, in my head, what I spend my nights thinking about is, where do all of these models intersect with one another? And as they intersect, that's something we want to bring out into the world.
Well, David, thanks so much again for being willing to come on and have a conversation. Let us know where people can find more about you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I really have a lot of admiration for all of us kind of doing this work. And so, I appreciate you and um, your work with your podcast. I have a podcast called Empowered Through Compassion. So if you would like to check that out, I think, listen to Tim's podcast. And then if you're like, I need more this week, come over to mine and listen to me. And I'm sure we kind of, augment each other in a beautiful way. Um, just, diving into this world, nerding out a little bit in this world, um, and in the realm of EMDR and IFS.
Well, thank you again so much. It's truly been an honor, and I look forward to continued collaboration as we seek to heal ourselves and bring this healing to the world. That wraps up another episode of IFS Meditations and Insights. If you found it helpful, please follow or subscribe, and share it with others, and leave a positive review to help more people find the podcast. For more IFS Meditations and Insights, visit exploreifs.com. Thank you for being a part of this community. Remember to be compassionate with yourself and others. Until our next session, take care, stay curious, and do your best to embrace all parts of your journey.